Thank you, Roger. I would like to tell you a story about a fellow that decided he wanted to experience parachuting. And it's kind of a dangerous sport. And most of us would go to a school, we'd learn how to do it so that when you jump out and you pull the ripcord, something doesn't come out, you know what to do so that you can survive. Well, this fella, he looked at what it cost and he said, man, I can save $1,000 if I do this all myself. So he rented the plane, he rented the parachute, rented with the pilot, had the guy take him up to 10,000 feet, and he jumped out. And everything was going great. It was the best experience of his life. He got down closer to the ground, it was coming up pretty fast, and he reached around and pulled the ripcord. Nothing happened. So he looked around to see if there was anybody that could help him, because he was in trouble. And down below came this woman just shooting straight up toward him, 100 miles an hour. And just as they got within, earshot, he said, "Lady, do you know anything about parachutes?" And she answered him, and her reply was, "No. Do you know anything about gas stoves?" Well, this is the kind of situation we want to avoid. And of course, ours aren't that extreme, but they may seem like it at the time. A big wreck is no fun. So anyway, these guys are my ancestors, and back in the 30s, there was a parade or something, and somebody got them to line up so they could take a picture of them. And they wore out more saddle leather faster than I wore out socks. But they ran a low input outfits. And the reason they did it, they didn't go to a seminar, they didn't go to the grazing school, and they didn't go to ranching for profit school. They didn't have any other choices. There weren't semis that would drop off $10,000 worth of feed in one load. And there just weren't very many options. But what they did was they had cattle that fit their environment. And those cattle could survive on their own 12 months out of the year, basically on their own or with a little help from, well, now we have a different model that we operate on. We have different choices for marketing. And it's not like it was back then. But I like to look back there and see what they did, because they were masters at low input production. Today we can market our cattle on heavy muscled grids, that they bring more money, but a big frame, big, heavy muscled, high milking cow doesn't work very well in my place. So what I need is a moderate framed, big gutted, easy fleshing cow to do what I want to do, what I'm asking her to do. And I want to stress her. I mean, I want her to work for me. I want her to work hard. And if she's laying around fat in February, she's not working very hard and she's costing me money. So my challenge, and I think we all have this challenge, is to adapt these two different conflicting things to our environment. And as it ends up, everybody's place is different. So it's your job. It isn't the instructors at the grazing school or anybody else's can give you the right answer. It's your job to trial and error, make little mistakes. What I'm going to talk about are sustainable goals and planning, extending the grazing season, summer grazing ideas, and winter grazing ideas. That's my daughter's pet crow, by the way. I'm going to skip ahead to, and I'll come back. I like to talk about goals. The two main goals at my place is to rotate all 36 pastures each year and to graze every day of the year. Now, we never achieve that goal completely, those goals. We actually season-long graze in one pasture. But it's the challenge of trying to meet that. Of course, if I'm going to talk about easy flesh and cattle, I got to go find one that demonstrates what I'm talking about. She actually didn't have a calf as a heifer, and she's a 3-year-old and getting ready to calve. So she's not typical. I mean, why we kept her, I can't even remember. But anyway, that's the story behind that girl. In 1991, I got involved in the Bootstraps program. Before that, I was into ranch work. After that, I started thinking about long-term planning. Ranch work, by ranch work I mean loading cattle, fixing fence, taking out mineral, having a list of jobs to do in the morning and getting them done by dark. Bootstraps was like the holistic management program that Rogers talked about, the Alan Savory thing. It was just a different, just put in a different context. It covered a lot of the same stuff. If you change one thing, whether it's a grazing plan, one thing in your grazing plan, one thing in your family, one thing in your feeding program, it will have a ripple effect throughout your whole operation. And some of the ripples are so small you can't even hardly tell they're there. But some of them are pretty darn big. And in 1984, I talked my dad into changing the style of cattle that we had from medium frame, easy fleshing cattle to big framed, heavy muscled, high milking cows, Galvy cows. That had a big ripple effect. And it took me a while to convince him we should do it. Turns out I was wrong. Those are the hard ones to swallow. But the fact was that they worked out reasonably well. We recovered from that pretty well and got along. But I recognized it. I'm not afraid to admit it. And I think that's the secret of making mistakes. Family, production, natural resources, and finances. And I don't know very many people that can have a sustainable business if one of those is out of balance. This business of complexity, I think, is interesting. I sat down and had lunch with Alan Savory at one of these tours, and I asked him, what do you feel was the most important contribution you've had with all the work you've done? And I thought he would say, oh, grazing or biological or financial or something. And he thought a minute. He didn't answer right away. He thought a little bit, and he said, managing complexity. And then he said, your ranch is so complex you can't manage it without a system. Impossible to do a good job. There are too many variables, too many things going on. So what he provided was this holistic management program, was a system. And I'll talk about that a little more. So when you're making these decisions, sometimes daily, without goals, instead of going in a straight line, you're veering all over. Goals guide your decisions, and that may be good goal setting, and adaptive goal setting may be the most important management tool available. I've done a fair amount of monitoring, and I see a lot of you guys have too. What I've learned from those, what I've done is that the simpler the better. The monitoring that fits my my ranch is way better. The only reason you're doing it is to improve management. So since it's a function of management, you should only do the monitoring that will help you manage better. Make a grazing plan. Even though you have you know what you're going to do, if you write it down and you know you're going to have to change something, even though you've got it written down on a plan at 1st of January and you get to the 10th of May, you have to change it, well, at least you have something to go back and change and look at. And a grazing plan has been a really good, helpful thing for me. So I plan, monitor, then replan. And it's not a big deal to change your plan. Let's see, a guy that does a lot of inspirational speaking, I heard him on the radio one day, and he said that the only time God laughs at us is when we make a plan. Well, so we know that our plan, especially when we're working with nature, our plan is going to have to be flexible. Plan, monitor, observe, replan. There are lots of different kinds of monitoring programs. Just going out and looking at songbirds can be one of them. And the bird tour was at our place a few years ago, and I learned a lot about the different kind of birds that were there. This is blue grosbeak, and I had no clue there was a bird like that. And the way I took the picture, I was using a really crappy camera, and she was just getting ready to release it. They'd weighed it and stuff, caught it in the net, and that just happened. I was just using a slow shutter speed, but. Anyway, that's the fact that you have lots of songbirds tells you that something's going good. If you didn't have a lot of songbirds, it'd be a good idea to figure out why. I'd like to talk about summer grazing, and I think we can divide. I like to divide it up into two groups: summer grazing, winter grazing. That's your year. Okay, then from there. In my operation, I really like to have some rotational grazing, and I really like it to fit my operation. Go north of me about 30 miles, and there aren't very many warm season grasses. At Gumbo, north of the Clay, north of the Big White, mostly cool seasons. At my place, there are lots of warm seasons and cool seasons. I think I like to look at our place as I think I have an unfair advantage. If I go to my kids go to school in Kadoka, north side of the interstate, those guys don't have two things that I have. I have good protection, lots of pine trees, cedar trees, badland canyons, and I have a big diversity of plants. And those guys can run a great operation up there, but because they have something else, that I don't have. But these are the two things that I think are my unfair advantage, and I try like crazy to exploit them. So on my pasture rotations, I like to work around the warm seasons and cool seasons. Cattle are, as you've learned in these, like the ID exercises and out on the allocation in the past little paddocks we're working on, cattle are selective. So let's use that as a tool, that selectivity. If you turn a bunch of yearlings out the first week of May, they will go select for a grass. I like to use that example because I used to really I used to really dislike cheatgrass until I found out cattle really like cheatgrass the first week of May. And they'll leave all the rest, most of the rest of the grass alone. 300 yearlings in a 400-acre paddock pasture, they'll just go around and find all the cheatgrass and eat it, that green, lush stuff that's high protein. I'm using them as a rotational tool. That's selectivity. They select for palatability. Another way of doing that is to, of using the cattle, or cool season grasses, is take advantage of the tame grasses. When we have some hay fields that are crested, intermediate, alfalfa, and we backed off our haying a number of years ago, quite a few years ago, so we graze our hay fields. Right at the time when western wheatgrass really can't handle high pressure, we go in, put our yearlings in our hay fields about the end of May, and we get about a month in there, depending on a lot of things, but that takes pressure off some of the native. So another unfair advantage are the warm season grasses. At the right time of year, cattle will select for them. So when big blue stem is really palatable and it's like ice cream to them, we can turn out into a winter pasture like this behind there. Those are pine trees on top. Those hills are cedar trees back there. That is where we have a lot of warm season grasses. And we can turn, for a certain amount of time, turn the cattle in there and watch what they're doing. And when they go in, the big blue stem leaves are knee high. We take them out when they're top of my boot. And if we keep moving like that, if we keep going, like we can go through 4 or 5 or 6 pastures like that. All of a sudden we got 2 months of grazing we didn't used to have. We didn't even know it was there. But also, though, it's important to maintain those patches of warm season grass by not overgrazing them.
Do you fence them river breaks in the hills where the trees were?
Okay, question is,
using that poly wire or what?
How are we fencing? Let me go back here. How are this stuff?
Yeah.
It's a good question, and I can spend a lot of time on that. I won't, but our ranch was divided into we had about 12, 14 pastures with barbed wire. And we've gone into all those pastures except a couple and subdivided them with high tensile. So the ones that aren't subdivided with high tensile, they are, they're 400 to 800 acres. And they're just a pasture in the rotation. So like this one behind these cattle there, that's a winter pasture between the road, which is that fence, and the top of the hill up there, which is about a mile up there, 1.5 miles. And then on the other side is another winter pasture. And we move through those in the summer fast enough so they just graze the big blue stem. We go back in the winter in a rotation, and they graze the western wheatgrass, green needle, cool seasons. I've kind of gotten to the point where I asked Bud Williams, said, "What's the livestock guy? What's the best design for a corral design?" And he said, "Well, for you or for me?" And I said, "What about for you?" And he said, "Doesn't matter." He said, "I don't care." And why is that? And he said, "Well, because I have the tools and the skills to put cattle into a corral and work them in just about any design. But for you, you're going to need something pretty good." So It took me a while to get over that, you know. But this is the same thing. When I first started, I needed smaller paddocks. Now I've learned how to do it. I've learned, let me put it this way, I've learned how to manage these bigger pastures. And we used to get a crew together to go move cattle out of one of those rough pastures when we were moving. Now one guy does it a lot of times, sometimes two, and it's easier if you got a couple kids along. And my brother-in-law has a couple of cow dogs, and he can absolutely do it by himself. I can do it by myself most of the time. And it's so you just kind of learn, and you learn the strategy of if you go this way, you know, if you go to this pasture, then this pasture, then this pasture, it won't work because it's just too hard to get the cattle through that way. So you use another approach and work with their, you know, kind of their, the way they like to move. Prevailing winds, you know, which northwest, east, whatever seems to be prevailing helps, because they always want to go into the breeze, almost always. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
Do you feel like on these dry years you're hurting your winter pasture by clipping that early in the summer?
Okay, I'm not clipping the winter grass. They're selecting for the warm season grasses that are not very palatable in the winter. The western wheat is the one that's palatable in the winter and maintains some energy, more energy and protein. So I'm out there with them, checking on them, going around looking at those patches. So turn in, say, the 1st of July. 300 yearlings in a 800-acre pasture, that one behind there. And I know I don't have to go look at them for a week, but at the end of the week, I'm thinking, yeah, I gotta go check, you know, go look at those patches and see how short they are. Because they first go to a patch and they clip the top, then they go to another patch. They get a lot of these patches clipped, then they go back and start over. And I really like to do it with yearlings because they're so nosy, you know, and they like to move around. They're not afraid to go from one end of the pasture to the other. And then I got two indicators that tell me it's time to move. One, the height of that big blue stem in the patches, and two, the western wheatgrass in the low depressions. If they're starting to graze the tops off that western and those low depressions, I move them. It's time to go. Even if there's other warm seasons like side oats, grama, and little blue that they haven't touched, because now they're starting to impact our winter range, and I don't want that. You know, is that what you're? This provided, when we figured this thing out, it was like renting another 10% of the ranch, going out and getting more land, or 5% or something, you know. I mean, it's a big deal. Other questions? And when this came out of a Bootstraps resource inventory, the guy that did it, took my dad and I up on that ridge up there, and he said, look around you, and he said, I'm telling you, you guys should be running your yearlings through these pastures in the summer. Flash grazing, he called it. And we both turned to him and said, it won't work. So anyway, then I kind of started thinking, yeah, I want to try that. So first time I did it with 25 head, you know, scared to death. And then got up to 400 head. And at about a little point somewhere in between the 25 and 400, my dad decided he was full steam ahead. You know, he saw it work, and he said, "This is what we're doing, and I'm behind you 100%. Get her done." And so it's a process. There's a learning curve. Other questions?
I have one. How does that fit with grazing different species at different times? Or grazing that pasture differently each year. Do you not always follow that thought?
Yes. And the question is the seasonality of grazing. So you're changing the time you go into a pasture.
Right.
Absolutely. And what we do is that if we can keep our stocking rate low enough, we can go into different pastures at a different time every year, doing this type of thing, this warm season grazing, and we can stay out of one of them every year. Like this year, we stayed out of a 900-acre pasture. So it won't have cattle until probably December. And it was grazed in February last year. So now I'll probably defer the one on the other side of the ridge the next summer. We might defer them all if this big blue is looking tough, because I don't want those patches to recede. And we've been doing it for 15 years and the patches haven't receded. If they start receding, then we're in trouble. We first thought we were in trouble because switchgrass likes to grow right next to big blue stem. And the cattle don't eat the switchgrass very well. So they'll go into that patch and eat the switchgrass or the big blue, and I thought, well, now the switch is going to grow, but big blue is vigorous enough that it hasn't happened. We don't have a problem with that. I guess that's why. I don't know. But monitoring, just visually monitoring, just eyeballing, looking. And this is the thing that before I started doing this, I didn't realize how much fun ranching could be. This grazing thing is fun. You start seeing what's out there and the opportunity. Now to a cool season kind of grazing. This is on a tame grass hayfield, and there's 575 head in that group. I learned a lot from experimenting with mob grazing on 180 acres. And one of the things I learned was that why the heck are we doing it? I thought, oh, I'm going to landscape. That was my goal. I was going to landscape. I was going to get more litter. I was going to have the litter incorporated into the soil. I was going to increase organic matter. I was going to do all this. And the first thing, a lot of things happened when I started doing this. We were moving every 2 hours. And for one thing, I learned that that's too much work for me, not for my daughter. She thinks it's great. Another thing I learned was that I can't take cattle out of a 1,000-acre pasture and put them in 2 acres and expect them to be happy. It pisses them off. They just go, what have you done to us? And they bawl and they get angry and they knock the fences down. And so I had to start in like a 15-acre one and then work my way down. And then by the time I got them, I could get, if I do it right and watch their behavior and pay attention, I can get them into a smaller paddock and keep them content. So that's the animal behavior part of it. Now how about the landscaping part? Well, the first experience I had was that I had the first, 10 little paddocks I had them in. I was on shorter grass and western wheat, blue grama, and I would confine them in those little paddocks, and they would tromp the ground, but they weren't knocking it down. If I left them in there long enough for them to really impact the soil, they ate all the grass. And so now I didn't have any litter, and that was one of my objectives. Down here where they are right now, where the grass is waist high when it's mature, there they really did knock it down. They did incorporate litter into the soil. I was achieving my goals down there, but that's only about 30% of this 180 acres. So that really brought me around to this whole idea of how is this working on my place? And this business of stepping out of my house in the morning and they're a mile away and I can hear them bawling. Cattle aren't gaining well if that's going on. So I wasn't doing, and that really was my first goal, was to keep the cattle gaining. So I found out that in order to landscape with cattle, you can't do it, I can't do it, I haven't been able to do it, and keep them gaining. Get getting 2 to 2.5 pounds a day. I need them, the soil or the plant had, the top third of the plant has the most energy in it. And that's, if I go through a pasture with them and they go, and it's the size where they're, say it's a 10-acre paddock, they're in there for one day, and they clip that top third off, and then I move to the next one. Now we're gaining 2.5 pounds a day, I think. I don't weigh them, but they really gain. And you know they're gaining because they're eating that good stuff. They're happy. They're laying down, chewing their cud, getting up, eating, laying down, chewing their cud, getting up and eating, move to another paddock. And that kind of behavior. When I've got them, when they're unhappy and they bawl at you when you drive in the paddock and they tear the fences down and that kind of stuff, that's an indication of animal behavior that isn't content and they're not gaining. I learned lots of stuff from mob grazing. I mean, what I did. I'm still learning. I'm going to always be learning. Now, I really like litter. And the last couple of years, it has become evident to me that litter is a fantastic thing. This year, when things dried out in July, like right toward the end of July, wherever we had good litter, we had good grass that was still growing. Where we had poor litter, the grass had quit growing. Now think about that. If that is extending your grazing season, if this pasture over there on that hardwood floor, there isn't any litter, and over here there's lots of litter, and you get 3 more weeks of growth, I mean, that's incredible. That's tens of thousands of pounds of production right there. And in a drought, a dry year, that's pretty valuable. I'd say if you use mob grazing in it and you accomplish your goals of and you get some more litter down, it's a good thing. You've done a great thing. I still haven't figured out how to do it on native pasture that's not very tall and get that pressed down. Now, here's another thing. Ian Mitchell is a grazing consultant from South Africa. He and Alan Savory hobnobbed around a lot, and Ian came here and did a seminar. And after the seminar, he came out, stayed at my ranch, and spent the night, and we spent all day going around the pasture, or the ranch. And now he's a mob grazing guy. How many of you know who Ian Mitchell is? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, not very many. So he's a mob grazing South African guy that is really good, a good teacher, good instructor, and everything. So we went to one of our winter pastures and got off the four-wheeler, and he looked down like this, and he went, "Oh, your grass goes down by itself." And then he walked off, and so I followed him around and said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Oh, we have to knock it down with cattle where I live. Here, the snow must knock yours down because it's down, it's on the ground. That last year's growth is down." Well, that's huge. I mean, that tells you that we have a little advantage there that they came across. He mob grazed mainly to get it knocked down, and we've already got that done. Doesn't mean you shouldn't mob graze. It's just that if you don't graze a pasture, the next year it'll probably be, the old stuff will probably be laying on the ground, and between snow and wind and our conditions. This is a picture of warm season grass. The guy's standing in it. Behind him is a winter pasture. All the brown is cool season. That's in August. Everything's dried up, and we were just getting ready to put these yearlings in there. And That's where the nutrition is, where he's standing, so that's where the cattle are going to go. This winter grazing is another one of what I look at as my unfair advantage. I try to exploit it. We do to the full, as much as we can. This is another winter pasture. There's protection there. There's grass there. Grass that they can eat during the winter. Now, this whole process of stockpiling grass gives the grass plants a chance to express themselves, go to seed, be a plant, you know. That, if we could do that on every pasture at some time over a 10-year period on our ranch, we have better, healthier grass, healthier pastures. This goes back to our goal of graze 52 weeks out of the year. On my place, it's tradition. And I've never known anything different. It's really helpful to know how much is there. And I go out this time of year and clip and weigh, and just like you go out and count bales in your stack yard, you know, and find out what's the tonnage, what can we stock. We got a 2,000 acre pasture that we had 195 pairs there, cows in last winter, and I've been weighing and looking, and it looks like we're going to be able to put 110 in this year. It's a big difference, you know, and maybe 100. You know, we're looking at almost reducing that by a half because of what's there. I honestly believe that we have the end result of winter grazing is equal to more than the sum of its parts. That you get the advantages from biologically what's going on in the pasture is better. You get more in the end by doing it than just having cows and saying, okay, I've got 100 cows and I don't have to buy hay for 4 months. It's more than that. Okay, I'll get to you in a second. It's more than that because the wildlife go to these places. The plants get a chance to rest and become and be plants and get ready to be stressed again. Okay.
What kind of soil do you have on your ranch?
Well, this is a lot of badland stuff. See the white in the back? So we go from, that's one extreme. The other extreme is a clay soil. Is it clay-y, Dave? Am I correct there? And we have sandy soil. Big blue stem really likes those overflow sites off of the badlands. So that kind of sandy stuff goes down and spreads out, and that's where the warm seasons explode. We had a pasture that was, now, did I answer your question before I go any further? My dad said, somebody asked him one time, he said, where do you live? And he said, well, it's a good question. He said, I spent most of my life 4 inches from the Badlands. Well, I mean, that far under the top of the soil is that white stuff in a lot of places. So we're challenged with soil. We're challenged and we're challenged with cedar trees. We got a lot of them. When I was a kid, the only reason you could cut a cedar tree on this ranch was for a post. And you didn't ever cut one just to get, you know, I mean, just for, you didn't, I mean, they were so valuable. Now we've got so many that we're trying to figure out a way to get rid of them, some of them. Kind of a recap, winter grazing improves range, wildlife, water cycle, mineral cycle. Now, rotational grazing in the wintertime is it's a challenge. It's a challenge because of water and protection. There's one of my unfair advantages. I've got both. Rural water, and we've got protection. And in a lot of pastures. Ken talked about the nutrition plane of cows. When they get some protein, they're really digesting that. When they're on dormant forage and they've got adequate protein, they're really digesting it, and their manure patties are flat and everything's going good. So you turn into a fresh pasture and there's that green stuff, if you get rain in the fall, growing down there, the tops of the plants. The first few days they are really going to town. And then that protein level drops off. And then the patties start to pile up a little bit, and now if we season long graze for the winter, they'll go eat all that out the first 3 weeks, and they've got way more protein than they need. They get fatter in pigs, and then they start declining because they got the protein out of there. We quit feeding supplemental protein, and we started rotating in the winter. And if say we go 2 weeks, the first week they've got adequate protein, the second week it's below adequate. So the cow's going up, like that. Then we move them. They go up like that. A cow's made to do that. And so if we ration that out over the winter, we've been able to replace protein. Now, can you do that with a big frame Simmental cow that milks, that has a bag this big around? No. She's got to fit the environment to be able to do that. It's dangerous because you get to a place where there isn't protection, and you got to be careful. Got to be. It's expensive because initially you have to have water development to do it, and we didn't do it overnight. One of the things I really use as an indicator in the winter is is body condition. And what is it, 75 pounds it takes a cow to change to be able to actually see a body condition change? We see it all the time. Going through a winter, we see a cow, we see them changing condition. So they're really fluctuating. That really becomes evident when they're lactating in the winter. And we do some of that. We leave the calves on some of the cows, and last year we weaned 125 pairs in March. Now the reason we do that is that the mother is taking care of the calf and I don't have to. That's a big deal. So we couldn't do that with a Galby cross cow. They milk like crazy during the summer, and you got a bigger calf, but they can't take care of that calf in the winter. They need to be weaned. So we're in an organic program, and we sell some of our cattle organic, and we can do it. We can raise a calf, keep him organic, if we can keep him with his mother most of the winter. When we're rotating through these pastures, you can really see it. A lactating cow, when she starts falling apart, it's fast. So we're out there watching them a lot. We're watching we watch the grass. We see there's always a lot of grass left when we move, but the cows are starting to drop. And there's always a handful of them down on the bottom end, those cows that go faster than the others, and we watch those, and we see one drop down below a 5 condition score. Those ribs start showing up in the back and all that, and then we start thinking about moving. And our cows they're not perfect. I mean, we got cows that can't hack this kind of thing, and they show up. I mean, we see it. Now, any questions? Yeah.
At what point do you break down and put feed up?
Oh, we do. We absolutely do. And that's a really good question about when do we just say that we got to feed them. And that is critical when they're lactating, because we've got hay scattered around. This last winter we didn't ever have to do anything. We didn't have enough snow ever to to compromise their grazing. But we've got hay and feed lots, stack lots, and the best way we found is that not to wait until you see a problem. When you can tell they're having a little trouble grazing, we get some snow for 4 or 5 days in a row. And in my country, another unfair advantage, we get warm stuff comes along, and normally we get a snow and then it melts off. Snow melts off. That's the typical kind of thing. We get a lot of ice too, but usually there's grass somewhere. Maybe we'll go a week without it. But if we get in there right away and go out and feed them a little hay, like just 3 or 4 days of snow, we say, all right, we go out and feed them some hay. Then we're done. We don't have to do it anymore. As soon as we get a little warm wind or something softens things up, we quit. And they've never been babied, so they don't expect it. They just say, hey, this is kind of cool. And as soon as we quit, they just take off and start working again. And that has helped. Yeah. That answer your question? And we don't feed them a supplement. We feed them a custom mineral with if they're in the organic thing with nothing, no protein. If they're not, then they get some urea.
Dan?
Yes.
When you feed in the winter, when you feel like you have to, do you feed in a strategic place, in a strategic method?
Close to the hay lot. Yeah, just so we don't have to drive very far. No strategic anything. No. I wouldn't recommend you do this. And I'm saying that because it's a dangerous thing. I'm saying that because I don't want somebody to go home and say, Dan said I could run pears all winter, because you might not be able to right away. I think you could eventually. That's the kind of thing you want to try it with 25 head, and see, because it's a steep learning curve. It takes good management. You have to understand what the cows are faced with. The type of cow is critical. The winter, the weather, where are your safety valves? We're set up so we can wean tomorrow. If things are looking tough, we just wean. And boy, when it's like that in January, weather's kind of bad, it's easy to wean. Those cows, they want to get rid of their calves. The calves will, it's not hard. We fence line wean, and anyway, but I think it's a tool if you understand how to use it. It is an effective tool. I know guys that have been doing it west of me for forever. My ancestors did that. They used to wean in March. Absolutely. We keep our own replacement heifers, and we buy our bulls within 40 miles of the ranch, and we retain some of our own bulls just out of the herd. And the replacement heifers don't get special care. They get sometimes we put them in a little better pasture in the winter, and when we have some bad weather, we'll sometimes go give them a little bit of hay, just so that we're not letting them, we're maintaining a level. If we don't do that, we start having a little calving trouble. We calve in May, and 10th of May, those heifers start, and we'll run into condition score problems on a really tough winter. 10th of May, about half of them won't be in good enough shape to calve. So we're maybe a little early, but by the 20th of May, all of our heifers are in a 6 condition score. They must gain 4 pounds a day. I don't know how. They go from just, the ones that haven't calved yet, and the ones that calve, then they come back pretty fast too. I really like May calving on our ranch with our environment. Question.
Are you getting those heifers bred as yearlings then?
How well do we get them bred?
Are you breeding them as yearlings?
Yes. Yeah, and we have about 8%, 10% open sometimes. Steps to harvesting grass more efficiently. This is a summary. Identify grass for species for season of palatability. Stuff I've already said. My goals are different than my grandfather's. His pastures were 12,000 acres, and he liked to hunt coyotes. You know, I'm faced with some different challenges, and we do things a little differently, but we do a lot of things the same. My daughter has a few goats. You know, if you can make mistakes, let's just make them with 4 goats instead of 500. If you follow what I'm saying, keep a pile of hay there for emergencies. First year, build 1 fence. This is my suggestion. This is how I did it. Dave Steffen helped me back in those bootstrap days, and we built 1 fence first. And then we looked at what happened. And then we built 2 fences the next year. And we watched the results. I like that approach. It's a real learning thing. On page 5, I think, in that book, well, of course, it's in Roger's presentation in there, on page 5, there is a flow sheet for holistic management. And it looks complicated. I like this approach. This is kind of a simplistic look at that. If you test something you're going to do, make a change, test it with family, test it against production, test it against your natural resources and financial. How does it measure up? You know, if it's a very big change, it's going to have a significant impact. So if it doesn't work in any one of those, guaranteed it's going to be an uphill battle.